At 14:45 hours on September 5, 1934, Leni Riefenstahl stood on a platform mounted on tracks that ran the length of the Zeppelin field in Nuremberg. The platform, designed specifically for her film cameras, moved smoothly on rails, allowing cameras to follow marching formations without vibration. She wore trousers and a work shirt, unusual for a woman at a Nazi party rally where rigid gender roles were enforced. But Hitler had given her complete authority over filming the rally. Party officials who objected to her unconventional appearance were told to defer to her judgment. Below her, 152,000 SA and SS men stood in formation, arranged in perfect geometric blocks, stretching half a mile. The formations had been rehearsed for 3 days specifically for the film. Party rallies normally involved some disorder, men arriving late, formations, shifting banners positioned incorrectly. This rally was choreographed like theater, with every movement timed, every position marked, every visual element designed to appear on film exactly as Riefenstahl wanted. Hitler would arrive at 1500 hours. He would walk through the formations while Riefenstahl filmed from multiple angles, platform cameras tracking parallel to his movement, cameras on lifts, capturing aerial perspective, handheld cameras following at ground level. 36 camera operators were positioned throughout the field. Riefenstahl had spent weeks training them, explaining exactly what angles she needed, what movements to capture, what lighting conditions would produce optimal results. The sequence would last 6 minutes in the finished film. To capture those 6 minutes, Riefenstahl would film for 4 hours, generating 20,000 feet of film footage. She would later edit the footage down to 360 feet, selecting the shots that best conveyed power, order, and Hitler's dominance over the masses. The editing would take 8 months longer than filming, because editing was where propaganda became art. At 1500 hours, Hitler's motorcade arrived. Riefenstahl signaled her camera operators. The sequence began. Hitler emerged from his car and walked through the formations, while 152 Settler men stood motionless, faces forward, arms at sides. The cameras captured Hitler from low angles, making him appear larger. They captured the formations from high angles, emphasizing their scale and order. They captured individual faces, showing devotion and discipline. The footage was perfect. When edited with music by Richard Wagner and commentary by Rudolf Hess, it would create the most powerful political propaganda film ever made. Triumph of the Will would define how the world perceived Nazi Germany, would establish visual templates that political filmmakers would copy for decades, and would make Leni Riefenstahl simultaneously one of cinema's greatest artists and one of history's most controversial figures. The question that would haunt her for the next 70 years was simple and unanswerable. Can artistic genius justify serving evil? Bertha Helene Amalie Riefenstahl was born on August 22, 1902, in Berlin, Germany. Her father, Alfred Riefenstahl, was a successful plumber and heating engineer who had built a prosperous business. Her mother, Bertha Sherlock, came from a middle-class family with no artistic connections. The family was comfortable, conventional, conservative. They expected Leni to marry well and live conventionally. She did neither. From childhood, she was interested in performance, specifically dance. She studied ballet at the Berlin State Opera Ballet School, modern dance with Mary Wigman, and performed professionally by age 20. Her performances emphasized physical movement and dramatic expression rather than classical technique. Reviews described her dancing as powerful and unconventional, code words suggesting she violated classical dance standards. Her dance career ended in 1924 when she injured her knee during a performance. The injury was not career-ending by modern medical standards, but in 1924, without sophisticated orthopedic surgery, dancers who damaged knee ligaments retired. Riefenstahl spent months recuperating, uncertain about her future. During recuperation, she saw a mountain of destiny. a film by Arnold Fanck featuring dramatic mountain landscapes and dangerous climbing sequences. The film transfixed her. She contacted Fanck, convinced him to cast her in his next film, and spent 1926-1932 appearing in 6 mountain films directed by Fanck. The films were commercially successful, making Riefenstahl a recognizable actress in German cinema. But acting was insufficient. She wanted to direct to control the entire filmmaking process rather than just performing roles others designed. In 1932, she wrote, directed, and starred in The Blue Light, a romantic mountain film about a woman misunderstood by her village. The film demonstrated that she understood cinematography, editing, and narrative construction. Critics praised the film's visual beauty while noting the story was simplistic. The Blue Light attracted Adolf Hitler's attention. Hitler saw the film at a private screening in 1932 and was impressed by Riefenstahl's visual style and her ability to create emotional impact through imagery rather than dialogue. He requested a meeting. The meeting occurred in May 1932 at the Hotel Kaiserhof in Berlin. Hitler explained that he wanted films documenting the Nazi Party's rallies and activities. The existing newsreel footage was inadequate, captured by cameramen who understood journalism but not cinema. Hitler wanted someone who understood how to use film to create emotional impact, who could make rallies appear powerful and organized rather than chaotic political gatherings. Riefenstahl later claimed she was apolitical, that she accepted Hitler's offer because it was an artistic challenge, not because she supported Nazi ideology. This claim became central to her post-war defense. She insisted she was an artist serving art, not a propagandist serving a regime. The claim was self-serving and largely false. Her first Nazi Party film was Victory of Faith, documenting the 1933 Nuremberg rally. The film was competent but unremarkable, showing that Riefenstahl could film political rallies but had not yet discovered how to transform them into compelling cinema. Hitler was disappointed with the result and considered hiring a different director for the 1934 rally. Riefenstahl convinced Hitler to give her another opportunity. She explained that Victory of Faith had failed because she had insufficient preparation time, inadequate equipment, and no control over rally scheduling. For the 1934 rally, she needed complete authority control over when events occurred, where cameras were positioned, how formations moved, what lighting was used. The rally would be designed as a film set, not documented as a news event. Hitler agreed. He ordered party officials to cooperate with Riefenstahl completely to schedule rally events according to her requirements, to position formations where she wanted them to repeat sequences if her cameras were not ready. The 1934 Nuremberg rally became a film production as much as a political event. The result was Triumph of the Will, released in 1935. The film was 114 minutes long, documenting 6 days of rally speeches and ceremonies. But the film was not documentation. It was constructed narrative, carefully edited to create specific emotional responses. The opening sequence established the film's visual language: clouds shot from an aircraft with shadows moving across landscapes below. Hitler's aircraft descending through clouds toward Nuremberg. The city appearing below, medieval architecture and modern buildings. The aircraft landing. Hitler emerging, crowds cheering. The sequence conveyed Hitler as a godlike figure descending from the heavens to save Germany. This imagery was deliberate. Riefenstahl used religious visual metaphors throughout the film: light streaming through clouds, Hitler standing elevated above crowds, formations arranged to suggest order emerging from chaos. The references were obvious to audiences familiar with Christian iconography. Hitler was portrayed as a messianic figure bringing salvation. The rally sequences demonstrated Riefenstahl's mastery of visual composition and editing rhythm. She filmed SA and SS formations from angles that emphasized their scale and uniformity. She used telephoto lenses to compress perspective, making formations appear denser than they were. She filmed at dawn and dusk when light created dramatic shadows. She filmed from platforms, from lifts, from trenches dug specifically for low-angle shots. The editing created rhythm, long shots establishing scale cut to medium shots, showing individuals within formations, cut to close-ups of faces, cut back to long shots. The rhythm matched the music, creating unity between visual and audio elements. Speeches were edited to remove pauses and hesitations, making speakers appear more eloquent and confident than they were. The film's climax was Hitler's close-in speech at the Luitpold Arena. Riefenstahl filmed it from 16 different positions using every camera technique available, low angles, to make Hitler appear powerful, slow pans across listening crowds to show devotion, extreme close-ups of Hitler's face to emphasize his intensity. The editing cut between Hitler speaking and crowds responding, creating artificial dialogue between leader and followers. The speech itself was Nazi ideology, Germany's resurrection after World War I, defeat, the role of the party in national renewal, the importance of unity under leadership. But the film's power came not from the ideology but from how it was presented. The visuals made the ideology appear inevitable, necessary, historically determined. Triumph of the Will premiered in Berlin on March 28, 1935. Critics praised it as cinematic masterpiece. The Paris Film Festival awarded it a gold medal. The Venice Film Festival awarded it the Italian Cup. International critics recognized that Riefenstahl had revolutionized documentary filmmaking, had demonstrated that non-fiction could be as visually sophisticated as fiction. But the film's brilliance served propaganda. The power that critics praised was power harnessed to glorify a regime that was already implementing policies that would lead to genocide. The artistry that audiences admired was artistry designed to make totalitarianism appear attractive. The film that historians would study as cinematic innovation was innovation in service of evil. Riefenstahl's defense was that she was artist, not politician. She filmed what existed. She did not create Nazi ideology. She simply documented party rallies. If the rallies appeared powerful and organized, that reflected reality, not manipulation. This defense ignored that the rallies were staged specifically for her cameras, that she designed how events unfolded, that her editing choices created meanings that did not exist in raw footage. Her next major project was Olympia, documenting the 1936 Berlin Olympics. The film was ostensibly sports documentary, not political propaganda. But the Olympics themselves were propaganda designed to showcase Nazi Germany to the world. Riefenstahl's film was part of that showcase. She received unprecedented resources, 40 cameras, 200 assistants, unlimited film stock, complete access to all Olympic venues. She filmed for 16 days, generating over 400,000 meters of film. She spent 18 months editing the footage into 2 films totaling 223 minutes. Olympia pioneered sports cinematography techniques that remain standard slow motion to emphasize physical beauty, underwater cameras for diving sequences, cameras on tracks following runners, telephoto lenses isolating individual athletes. The technical innovation was remarkable. The film won numerous international awards and established Riefenstahl as one of cinema's great innovators. But Olympia also served propaganda. The film emphasized Aryan athletes' successes while minimizing Jesse Owens's victories. It portrayed Germany as a civilized nation hosting international competition, obscuring the regime's actual character. It presented the Olympics as athletic celebration, while ignoring that Jewish athletes had been excluded from the German team and that the event was designed to legitimize Nazi Germany internationally. Riefenstahl's relationship with the Nazi regime was complex. She was not a party member. She attended few political meetings. She avoided ideological declarations. But she benefited enormously from regime support, unlimited budgets, access to resources unavailable to other filmmakers, protection from criticism. She socialized with Hitler, Goebbels, and other regime leaders. Photographs show her smiling at party events, appearing comfortable with Nazi leadership. She later claimed she was unaware of Nazi atrocities, that she knew nothing about concentration camps or persecution of Jews. This claim was implausible. By 1936, anti-Jewish laws were public policy. Concentration camps for political prisoners were well known. Kristallnacht occurred in November 1938, with Jewish businesses and synagogues destroyed throughout Germany in coordinated violence. Claiming ignorance required either deliberate blindness or dishonesty. More damaging were allegations that Riefenstahl used concentration camp prisoners as film extras. During filming of Tiefland, a feature film she directed between 1940 and 1944, she used Romani people from concentration camps as extras. The Romani were forced to participate, transported from camps to the film set, then returned to camps. Some were later sent to Auschwitz, where they died. Riefenstahl denied these allegations throughout her life. She claimed the Romani extras were volunteers, that they were treated well, that she had no knowledge they came from concentration camps. Documents discovered after her death contradicted these claims. Letters showed she specifically requested gypsies from camps for her film. She knew their origin. She used them anyway. When World War II ended, Riefenstahl was arrested by American forces and held for interrogation. The interrogation focused on her relationship with Hitler, her knowledge of Nazi crimes, and whether her films constituted war propaganda. She maintained consistent positions throughout. She was an artist, not a propagandist. She filmed artistic subjects, not political ideology. She was unaware of Nazi atrocities. The interrogators were skeptical but could not prove she had committed crimes beyond making propaganda films. Making propaganda was not illegal under occupation law unless the propaganda directly incited violence. Triumph of the Will glorified the Nazi Party but did not explicitly call for violence against Jews or other groups. Olympia was sports documentary, not war propaganda. She was released in 1946 but immediately arrested by French occupation authorities, who conducted their own investigation. The French were more aggressive, accusing her of active collaboration with the regime. She was held until 1948, when she was released after French courts determined she was fellow traveler, but not active Nazi. In 1949, German denazification courts conducted their own proceedings. Riefenstahl argued she had never been party member, had never promoted Nazi ideology in her personal life, had made films that were artistic, not political. The courts classified her as follower rather than activist, the lowest classification short of exoneration. The classification meant she faced no punishment beyond what she had already endured through 4 years of detention. But the court rulings did not resolve the moral question. Even if Riefenstahl had not technically violated laws, even if she could claim artistic rather than political motivation, she had created the most effective propaganda films in history for a genocidal regime. Her films had made Nazism appear powerful, organized, and historically inevitable. Her artistry had served evil. The fact that she claimed not to support the ideology her films glorified made her complicity more contemptible, not less. Post-war, she attempted to resume her film career. She could not. No one would hire her. Film distributors would not show her old films. Producers would not fund new projects. Actors refused to work with her. The international film community blacklisted her not through formal process but through informal consensus that her work was morally contaminated. She spent the 1950s attempting to rehabilitate her reputation, writing memoirs that emphasized her artistic achievements and minimized her Nazi connections. The memoirs were self-serving, portraying her as a victim of unfair persecution rather than as someone who had enabled a criminal regime. Critics dismissed the memoirs as revisionist propaganda. In the 1960s, she reinvented herself as photographer, traveling to Sudan to photograph the Nuba people. Her photographs emphasized physical beauty, and ethnographic detail. They were technically excellent and commercially successful, published in multiple books that sold well internationally. Critics noted uncomfortable parallels between her idealization of Nuba physiques and Nazi aesthetics glorifying Aryan bodies. She continued photographing and publishing through the 1970s and 1980s, gradually rebuilding a career as artist separate from her Nazi-era work. She learned scuba diving at age 72 and spent her final decades photographing underwater environments. The underwater photographs were celebrated for their beauty and technical mastery, but her Nazi-era work remained controversial throughout her life. When film historians discussed her cinematic innovations, they could not separate the artistry from the propaganda purpose. When art critics evaluated her photography, they could not ignore that the same visual sensibility had once served Hitler. Every discussion of her work became discussion of ethics, of whether artistic genius could coexist with moral failure. Riefenstahl's consistent response was that art and politics were separate domains. Artists created beauty. Politicians determined how that beauty was used. She had created beautiful films. That Hitler used them for propaganda was his choice, not hers. She was responsible for her art, not for how others used it. This defense failed because Riefenstahl had not created art that was later appropriated. She had created art specifically for propaganda purposes. Triumph of the Will was commissioned by Hitler to glorify the Nazi Party. Olympia was funded by the regime to showcase Nazi Germany. The films were propaganda from conception. The artistic excellence made them more effective propaganda, not less. The defense also failed because artistic choices are moral choices. When Riefenstahl filmed Hitler from low angles to make him appear powerful, she chose to make him appear powerful. When she edited speeches to remove hesitations, she chose to make speakers appear more eloquent. When she used religious visual metaphors, she chose to portray Nazism as salvation. These were deliberate choices that served specific purposes. She could not claim artistic neutrality about choices that were inherently political. The ethical question surrounding Riefenstahl became, can great art be created in service of evil, and if so, how should it be evaluated? The question had no simple answer. Her films were technically brilliant, cinematically innovative, and artistically significant. They were also propaganda that helped legitimize a regime responsible for genocide. Both statements were true simultaneously. Reconciling them required acknowledging that artistic genius does not confer moral exemption. Film scholars addressing Riefenstahl's work typically adopt one of three positions. Some argue her films should be studied as technical achievements separate from their propaganda purpose. They emphasize her innovations in cinematography editing and documentary structure, treating the Nazi content as unfortunate context that does not diminish the artistic achievement. Others argue her films cannot be separated from their purpose. The innovations served propaganda. The technical brilliance made the propaganda more effective. Studying the films as pure art ignores that every frame was designed to glorify a genocidal regime. The film's beauty is inseparable from their evil purpose. A third position acknowledges both the artistry and the evil, arguing that Riefenstahl's work demonstrates that great art can serve terrible purposes, that technical brilliance does not guarantee moral worth, that artistic talent is ethically neutral and can be employed for good or evil. This position treats Riefenstahl as cautionary example rather than role model or villain. Riefenstahl herself rejected all three positions. Until her death, she maintained she was pure artist who had been unfairly persecuted for making beautiful films. She accepted no responsibility for how her films were used. She expressed no remorse for glorifying the Nazi regime. She insisted history would vindicate her as artist whose work transcended politics. She died on September 8, 2003 at age 101 in Pucking, Germany. Her obituaries reflected the unresolved controversy. Some emphasized her cinematic innovations and her post-war work as photographer. Others emphasized her role as Nazi propagandist and her refusal to acknowledge moral responsibility. No obituary could reconcile the contradiction between her artistic achievements and her service to evil. Her estate continued promoting her work as art separate from politics. Films were restored and released on DVD with commentaries emphasizing technical innovations while minimizing Nazi context. Photographs were exhibited in galleries with artist statements focusing on composition and beauty. The estate's position was that Riefenstahl's work should be evaluated as art, not as history. This position has been rejected by most serious scholars. Museums showing her work typically include extensive historical context, explaining the propaganda purpose. Film schools teaching her techniques typically accompany screening with discussions of ethics. The consensus is that Riefenstahl's work cannot be separated from its historical context, that understanding the artistry requires understanding what it served. The modern assessment is that Riefenstahl was a brilliant filmmaker whose talent was placed entirely in service of evil. Her innovations in cinematography and editing were real and significant. Her films remain technically instructive for anyone studying documentary filmmaking. But the innovations served propaganda, and the technical instruction must acknowledge that the techniques were designed to glorify fascism. Her post-war career as photographer demonstrated that she could create beautiful work outside political contexts. Her underwater photographs were genuinely artistic, serving no propaganda purpose. But this later work could not erase the earlier work's moral taint. She remained the woman who had made Hitler appear godlike, who had made Nazism appear inevitable, who had created the visual language of totalitarian propaganda. The question of whether she was artist or propagandist was false choice. She was both simultaneously. The propaganda was artistic. The artistry served propaganda. Separating them was impossible because they were integrated from conception. Riefenstahl's tragedy was that her greatest artistic achievements were also her greatest moral failures. Her genius guaranteed her historical significance, but that significance was as example of how artistic brilliance can serve evil, not as example of art transcending politics. Leni Riefenstahl, born August 22, 1902, died September 8, 2003. Filmmaker, photographer, dancer. Creator of Triumph of the Will, the most effective political propaganda film ever made. Pioneer of documentary techniques still used in sports filmmaking, political coverage, and visual propaganda. The artist whose genius served genocide, whose technical innovations enabled totalitarian glorification, whose legacy is eternal warning that artistic brilliance confers no moral superiority. The woman who found Hitler not in the sense of discovering him, but in the sense of finding in him a patron who would give her unlimited resources to create cinematic masterpieces. The filmmaker who used those resources to make evil appear beautiful, to make totalitarianism appear inevitable, to make genocide's architects appear as gods descending from clouds. The artist who spent 70 years claiming innocence, insisting she served art rather than politics, denying moral responsibility for work whose purpose was never in doubt. The genius whose greatest work was propaganda, whose propaganda was genius, whose life demonstrated that artistic talent and moral failure can coexist in single person without redemption or reconciliation. The defiant filmmaker whose post-war trial conducted partly in legal courts, mostly in court of historical judgment, produced verdict that she never accepted, guilty of creating beauty in service of evil. Guilty of placing genius at disposal of genocide, guilty of enabling totalitarian regime through artistic brilliance, guilty without legal punishment, but with moral condemnation that no artistic achievement could erase.